I'm Marc Henderson. I'm CEO of Laramide Resources, a uranium developer with assets in Australia, the United States, and a greenfield exploration opportunity in Kazakhstan. We're listed on Toronto, the Australian Stock Exchange, ASX, and OTC QX.
Mark, good to see you, sir. Mark, very good to see you. I guess it's interesting times. The market kind of feels like there's a lull, there's an expectancy of sort of pregnant pause, if you will. And companies have got to focus on what they can control and how they play this market. So today, if you don't mind, I'm going to focus on some of those things. What are you in control of, and what are you doing about it? We better start with, well, what have you got on the table? What are the assets? What are the projects that we're looking at?
Sure. No, I think that's the right way to go when you go through these periods of time when the price isn't really driving the action in a lot of these names, and a lot of names have gone a bit soft, but the bull market's alive and well, and I'm sure we'll have chat about that. So we've got, as I said, we got late stage development assets. They're significant assets. They're large in scale. They're in the right part of the cost curve, and they're in the right jurisdictions as far as the production stuff. Being in the United States, which obviously, they're trying to go for energy dominance, and I think that now includes being visibly supportive of nuclear in every facet. In Australia, where we've had an election outcome in one of the states that we needed, so that will hopefully result in them saying, yes, of course, we're going to mine uranium in Queensland, and hopefully eventually in all of Australia. Because by the way, the Western world needs them to come online if they want energy security in the West. And then we have this greenfield thing in Kazakhstan. But in the United States, we've got an ISR project. It's very late stage development, I would say, mainly because we have most of the permits. We have an NRC license. We're doing an NRC license renewal process that we've initiated. That presumably will be public at some point because it goes on their website. It takes, around a year probably. And we're basically going to end up with what we have already, which is the right to produce in northwest New Mexico from a specific location from an initial well field. And then there's other caveats and stuff that govern the license. We need one final state permit from the state of New Mexico. And we're visibly trying to get that, obviously, and in the middle of that. We got a grant from the Department of Energy to support the data set that supports that permit, because it's the water permit, the restoration permit. And so this work's being done at Los Alamos, which is obviously a famous research place in nuclear generally, and certainly in America. It's the best mines in nuclear in all of America, with the DOE co-funding the whole thing. And so that's going to be a thing that takes to the end of 25 probably before all that data set comes together, and then we'll have a permit application. And in a perfect world, ideally in 26 we have our final permit, and then effectively we'd be shovel ready to build our project. It starts at it's a very large ISR with 50 million pounds. We did a economic study a year or so ago which showed for the first time all the economics of it, which are the economics of ISR that you would expect if you have the grades we have, the nature of the ore body we have, and the scale. There's a lot of margin in it, and it starts at 1 million pounds. And ideally, you'll eventually have multiple well fields going at the same time, going into a plant that's licensed for 3 million pounds of capacity, and you'll have a very nice situation longer term. And the beautiful thing about ISR is, it's relatively low cost in terms of both OPEX, but particularly CAPEX. It doesn't take you that much to get these things off the ground. And in terms of disrupting the market, if you will, it's 1 million pounds a year. No matter what happens with the market, no matter what happens with all these other bigger projects that are trying to get, significant utility contracts, that's a viable thing. That $80 is going to happen. And it looks to me like $80 is the new real price for the uranium price that the utilities are willing to pay. Then we get to Australia. We've got a late stage development thing as well, where we've done a lot of work in the last couple of years. We're about to put a resource calc out from that work that's been done that hopefully will bump the thing to a little bit bigger than it was. It was already a project of scale at 50 plus million pounds that had, let's say, 3.5, 4 million pounds of production capacity. Our goal is to really take that to 70 million pounds, 5 million pounds a year, etc. We're really waiting for the state government there to give us the official nod that they're going to be okay with uranium mining in that state, at which point we'll transition quite aggressively to a development phase, if you will, particularly starting with permits and all that sort of thing, and ultimately hopefully within a few years, because things go relatively quickly in Australia relative to, let's say, Canada. you'd have a project that'd be up and running by 28, 29 kind of thing. So that's where that stands. And Kazakhstan is a brand new thing, exploration opportunity. We think it's a big asymmetric opportunity in the greenfield space. And we think, by the way, in this cycle, because this gets back to the macro, the market really hasn't focused on the fact that once we get through all the developers and all these legacy projects, and by the way, they're mostly, other than, let's say, NextGen and the stuff on the west side of the basin, we're really working off bringing the final legacy asset base that everybody knew about online to meet all the demand in nuclear. And then once we get past that, then what?
Thanks for the right kind of run through, right? And I'm going to come back on some of those if you don't mind. But I got to start with this kind of overarching theme that we're in. I don't necessarily want to talk macro with you today because I think everyone listening to this, will have read, listened, watched, videos ad infinitum on the topic. But at the end of last cycle, 2011, Fukushima happened, and then it became okay. Everything kind of just shot down. 450 companies out of 50 companies, and the name of the game was, quite frankly, just kind of stay in the game. Still be around to actually play the game. And there's been lots of business models employed during that time. Some people have gone off on large acquisitive streaks where they've kind of bought their way to large market caps. Others have struggled to find money, and and everything in between. A question which I think comes up a lot, and I think a reasonable question is like, how many of these guys are actually serious about getting to production? So I'm going to ask you that question. Yeah? Are you serious about getting into production?
Well, we're very serious. I can't speak for the rest of the group. I mean, the nature of the stuff that we were fortunate enough to acquire the foundational asset. It was an ex-Rio Tinto asset. So when you have one of those, yeah, the whole business mantra of this is last cycle. The mantra of the company was to be a supplier of choice to the Western, we didn't call it Western utilities. John Borshoff calls them tier one utilities, call it what you like. As things have developed, interestingly enough, turns out that even if you want to now, good luck trying to sell to the Chinese going forward. I think that's suddenly a new thing in everybody's calculation about, well, yeah, there's a big market out there. Well, but the market is definitely bifurcated. And there's big nation state utilities that probably are a bit tricky for Western companies to be a visible supplier to. So we were always about that. And we were always about, when we had the choice of getting involved in certain things or not getting involved in certain things, it was always about, is this a viable deposit that is going to work at a realistic price? Our price from the last cycle was 50. I would say that price now is 80. And I would say if companies don't have projects that work at 80, then they better get exploring for something that works at 80, because the utilities are going to be happy to pay you 80, I think, and eventually probably 100, but they're not going to do 100 tomorrow. I mean, it seems like there's a number of real things that actually have moved forward, and they're all kind of clumping up at the same time, because you went from having nothing of scale coming on to suddenly there's a lot of folks that could, that have permits, could go, and suddenly in 28 to 30, well, there's a lot of supply. So when you do these models, yes, we need a lot more uranium, but we don't need it all to start in 2030. So that's, I think, maybe some of the noise in the marketplace and in the spot price and everything else. So our stuff is 100%. The issues we have are not because we can't move it forward. We're doing everything in our control to advance everything every day. Most things we have now are either governmental, with the nitty gritty of the actual permitting process, or political, as it was in Queensland, Australia for a long time, which hopefully now has gone away. And once that goes out of the way, it's charge as hard as we can to get to the finish line. And because we have a project that works, I mean, when you're in the lowest quartile of the cost curve, which is, if you're a commodity producer, most of every other commodity, certainly the ones that you have to sell into the spot market or any kind of market that isn't got a term market, the only strategy is to be a low cost producer. Realistically, I mean, uranium is a bit unique because you do have this contracting market. So you, in theory, could sell your entire project at a price if you wanted to.
Yeah, but that's the interesting thing here is I'm intrigued by how people are playing this market and how people are valuing the companies, right? Because not a lot of production happening, which is usually how you judge a company, how much it produces and the margin that it achieves from cost versus sale price. and that becomes margin, right? There's none of that on the table at the moment. It's hard to, as an investor, call on a fundamentals basis what's real and what's not. So just again, sticking with your projects, I'm obviously looking at church. Looking at your projects at Westmoreland and Church Rock and the new one in Kazakhstan, is how you go about prioritizing your time, capital allocation, etc. Is it purely grade? Is it capex requirements? Is it permitting timelines? Is it just still market conditions focused, or is it something else? And do you necessarily sort of have to factor in things like, well, maybe we need to spin one of these things off to kind of finance our ability to move something forward?
Yeah, good question. So the thinking once we acquired Church Rock was always because of the what I referenced earlier, the nature of the lower capex and everything else, and also because it had permitting on it already, advanced permitting with the NRC license, which had to be transferred to us. I mean, that was a process that took 6 months for them to approve you to be able to hold an NRC license. It was always that would go first. You get that in production, you'd have a bunch of cash flow. It would support the construction of the bigger thing, being Westmoreland. And it was further behind anyway because of the nature of the politics, and then it's got permitting timeline ahead of it. So that was always going to be the philosophy. But I mean, the other part of our strategy was always you want to be a multi-asset company, because if you really say the utilities are my customer, what do the utilities value? They value the certainty that if they're going to give you a contract, that they don't really care how you deliver it to them, but you can't go up to them at 5 minutes to midnight with this £1 million you were supposed to deliver to them and say, well, we had a bit of a hiccup. Sorry about that. What do you want to do? And so traditionally the bigger players, like obviously the Camecos and people like that, they said, well, we'll find it, we'll buy it in the market, we run with inventory all the time, etc. And so having other two mines in production or a portfolio is always better. And I've always thought that as this cycle advances, we're going to go and start creating these bigger entities that have those characteristics. And I think the Paladin acquisition of Fission is kind of probably the first big step in that direction, where they could now obviously make that case. They're obviously quite attractive to the utilities because, once that thing starts, it's a large capex. A company that has more capacity is obviously going to be capable of delivering the project.
Right. And so, but how do you kind of position the company? Because you see some players like NextGen, big asset, 25, 30 million pound per year for whatever it is, 12, 15 years. Yeah, that sounds sexy. But, maybe we've got to talk about the capex there. Maybe we've got to talk about permitting there. Boss Energy gone into a former producer, now buying chunks of Alta Mesa from Encore, etc. Encore with their ISR in the US. There's lots of different models out there, and I'm not quite sure if there's any one fixed model which was going to work better than another. But how do you position yourself? How do you define the business model to your sort of institutional investors? What are they buying into?
Well, we would have the other thing that could happen with something like the business plan that we've outlined. Okay, so we need our initial capex, whether it's 50 million or 70 million or whatever it turns out to be. There's a lot of institutional capital that actually wants to try and get into this energy space, be attached to the nuclear thematic, whatever. We're actually talking to some private equity type players and what have you, which is interesting because that's obviously a huge pool of capital. But otherwise, the traditional model would be you're going to, something like an ISR thing, you're going to get it financed off. You typically don't want to do it all equity, but obviously there's some contracting that could be done there or debt that could be done there. And then if you go into a bigger thing like a Westmoreland, you're obviously going to need contracts. I mean, I don't know what the biggest project that's ever been brought online by a non-cash flow, non-producing entity. But my guess is probably not that big and done without an actual off-taker. Like if you look at the Cameco stuff in east side of the basin, they've got France Inc. in there taking their material because they need it. And that's only 20 million pounds. So is a 30 million pound thing going to get off the ground with none of that happening? We'll see. I guess that's and that's partly, I think, what's causing the bit of the wobble that we're having in the space, as there's a whole bunch of folks that could, in theory, be up and running by 29, 30, 31. And the utilities are probably saying, well, okay, let's talk.
Well, I think it's a case of show me, don't tell me. I think, and I'm waiting for utilities to maybe really kind of get into the weeds and work out who's real and who's not. Because I think like in all sectors, the people talk a good game. Some people talk a good game, but don't actually get across the line for lots of reasons. And it's hard, it's expensive, etc. So is there enough uranium there to sate the needs of these guys sitting on 2 years worth of inventory? I don't know the answer, but I'd like an intelligent conversation about it, because we don't even see that from the WNA. There's no challenging of numbers that are presented as deliverable by certain dates. So it's opaque, I think the phrase is.
Well, it's a weird dynamic because pretty clearly there is a giant deficit, and let's take it through the 2030s. Say these folks that run nuclear utilities, they need to have some line of sight on realistically 5 to 10 years of visibility of where the supply is coming from. I mean, they can all say, "Oh, I'm only going to look after myself," and I've done deals with A, B, and C company, and I'm pretty confident it's going to happen. Or they own shares of mines. Like in the bigger nuclear nation states have never said, "Oh, I can just go to the spot market. I can just have a few contracts with some projects because in case something goes wrong." In a lot of cases, that's one of the reasons they want to own things directly. Like if you look at the way France basically did their procurement strategy, the way Japan did their procurement strategy, the way China is doing their procurement strategy, because they have so much demand, they are doing a little bit of everything, right? But at the end of the day, the new market, like this cycle, the utilities market is different than the last cycle because China is a much bigger footprint in that market, and it's a because of the geopolitics of it, it's a lot trickier than it was with if there was a big new, if Poland gets their plants built, or the UAE. The UAE, no one thinks, okay, whatever. Well, of course we can. Well, they did the thing, Western interests basically built it, or the Koreans built it, and we're going to supply in there, and it's fine. And that's tricky. And you've also got a country, Kazakhstan, where we've actually obviously gone in there because we think it's a really exciting opportunity longer term. But they've got two giant customers right next door, and so you got to think over a long period of time, those customers are going to have tight relationships there because it just makes sense. But even those countries like China can't just rely on Kazakhstan. That's not their demand is voracious. I mean, the number they're going to need is crazy.
Yeah, like I say, I don't necessarily want to get into the supply demand conversation, because I think most uranium people who've been around will understand that there's demand far exceeds supply, and certainly that gap's going to widen over literally next year, the year after that, because there's not enough being done, enough being invested in terms of finding this stuff or developing this stuff, and even the producers are struggling for a reason to get back into production on some of their projects. But look, just back to some of the kind of inbound questions with us is right. Obviously, we saw Peninsula sort of struggling, and is still currently struggling with their ISR project in Wyoming, whilst others like Encore Euro Energy, it's not a problem. So was that an ISR issue, or is that a specific field management issue? And how does that affect you, I guess?
I don't know. I can't really speak to that. It does seem that restarts are maybe trickier than starting with a brand new situation, because thankfully the boss folks got their thing up and running seemingly quite nicely in the market like that. And I think we need more success stories like that. But at the end of the day, for the market writ large, I mean, those things, those 1 million, 2 million pounds a year here and there, like, okay, that's not going to fix the problem. And it's not like we have 6 other of those in the pipeline that we know about where the resource is already drilled out. I mean, when you get to our stuff, part of the thing is, of course, these are projects that are well advanced because all the technical work has been done, and the pool of stuff behind that is small. So as I said before, to get back to your question, we are absolutely controlling everything we can control, pushing as hard as we can to get permits. It does get a bit frustrating because the timeline on these permits, is so much longer than it is on anything else. If we were in the oil and gas business, the money would be coming up the hole already. Once you have your permit and you're successful and you hit something, the cash flow follows pretty quickly. Mining is, as you know, because you cover tons of mining stuff, you go through these long periods of time with the investors get pretty depressed. And then you've got commodity risk over top of it. The good thing about nuclear is I think we all agree that the price resolution to where we are today with spot, and the spot shouldn't drive the pricing of all these stocks, but unfortunately a lot of it seems like it does. I don't think the term price is going to $50. And that's what investors should focus on. They should focus on that term price if they want to be long-term players and take advantage of weakness when we're in periods like this where the market's scratching its head and going, what's going on? Maybe it's over. Because I know we heard a lot of this from, and you probably did too, because you probably interviewed a lot of lithium companies and everything else. That was a different case. That was the classic, oh my God, we thought it was going to be super hot sector, and miraculously supply and demand and free market worked. And suddenly there's way too much supply. And by the way, the whole business case was underpinned by a model, not by actual nuclear plants that are built and up and running and need fuel for the next 60 years. And, something went wrong and then everybody lost a lot of money in that space. And so now they hate commodities again.
Well, I think lithium was, tulip bulbs moment. It really is very misunderstood in terms of the demand drivers and the fact that even the size of the market. And as it turns out, the ability of how much lithium could be produced by various entities around the world. So I think it's extraordinary in this day and age that we kind of fell for that one. And a lot, I say, value destroyed. And that's not good for the sector as a whole. It really is.
Not. Yeah.
Okay. So let's focus on Church Rock, okay? Because it's ISR, as you say, that is kind of, I guess, quicker to market potentially in all the kind of green reasons, less impactful, etc. But also potentially very higher margin. Is that the flagship? Is that in terms of priority? I know Kazakhstan will probably be third in that list, but assume Church Rock is ahead of Westmoreland because of the politics in Australia at the moment being resolved.
It's just ahead because it's only needs one more permit, and it literally could be
so let's get into that one.
27. Worst case 27. I mean, we obviously have a very strong political tailwind for the energy generally, but certainly for the nuclear sector now in America for the next 4 years. I mean, I know it seems like crazy town every day because we're only 4 weeks into this administration, and it's hard for everybody to, everybody's reeling from all the, every day there's a new decision. But I mean, if you look at the people that are in the important positions that matter on some of these philosophical things that the administration is supposed to be about, I mean, energy was one of the big thematics during the campaign. Trump has appointed this Chris Wright, who's really a rock star in the energy business, to be honest. Like, he's super involved in fracking company. He was one of the founders of this Oklo, or one of the directors of Oklo, which is a SMR developer. And that's the thing that's the thing to come in the future of nuclear. That's a bunch more demand that we don't have any uranium for, by the way, theoretically. And so with those people in positions of power, you have to think that things are going to go generally pretty well if you're in any part of the supply chain in nuclear in the United States during the tenure of this administration. Things have got to be going well. And it gets back to, in the old days, this industry boomed because and this is one of the reasons why America cares about it. The uranium itself is a teeny weeny little industry, and it's only one part of the whole nuclear fuel cycle and everything else. The big kahuna there is selling nuclear power plants. And so I would think that America would like to have energy dominance in SMRs, or be the person that drives the license design on SMRs. And of course, the Chinese are going to do their own thing where they'll have one design, and they'll be trying to sell those presumably other places as well. So it does matter. This industry is important. I mean, energy is fundamental. And you've got a person in Chris Wright and he's very articulate about what it is. I mean, you can go and look at that. Everybody's probably seen this thing. He put out the 10-point thing about his philosophy on energy, and just read that, and that tells you everything you need to know.
Well, Chris Wright and Sam Altman at Oklo, well known, well documented. But I want to get back to the kind of commercial realities of what we got here. So I buy all the demand drivers. But let's go back to Church Rock, New Mexico. So in terms of this permit, what is it? I mean, what's the permit for?
It's for you have to demonstrate restoration, that you can do restoration to satisfactory levels, and then they will grant you a permit. And what happened there was actually we bought the project because we were the royalty holder before, and the company that had it before, which was URI, it's not called Westwater, they had the permit, and then New Mexico changed the standard and made the standard higher to achieve. But it's that standard or background. So it's basically putting us through the gauntlet of running the permitting process again on this one particular permit. So at the end of the day, the assumption is you'll get that permit. And basically everybody that wants to permit things in the United States, if you are persistent enough, you will get the permit. I mean, someone will litigate against you at the end of the day, and if the litigation has no merit, I mean, the agencies are responsible. They have to go defend the litigation for the permit they gave you. So everything is very rigorous, and it takes time. So the big thing is time. So the frustration, I think, for folks like us is because, like, back to things we can control, we just have to do the thing, do the work, get through the permitting thing. There's very little in the way of interesting, exciting news. It's the equivalent of watching paint dry while you're in the permitting process, especially this late stage. Like, we already have a Nuclear Regulatory Commission approval to do what we want to do. And so it's just, there will be a time when we will have the permit, and believe me, at $80, it's going to get built, and we'll be cracking on it. We won't have to do exhaustive studies or anything else. It'll just be, there'll probably be a feasibility study that will build off the PA that came out on the initial well field, which is very good grade, and very good economics, and it'll just go from there. Now, also in New Mexico, I would say that in Church Rock will be the flagship, obviously the first thing in New Mexico that would get off the ground. Now, in the Hard Rock side, because we're permitting something else on the Hard Rock side that could feed into the White Mesa Mill in Blanding. And there's only 3 companies that have live permits going on in New Mexico. And there will be some more ISR things, I think, happening, because General Atomics is talking about doing Mount Taylor, which is the biggest deposit in the United States, as an ISR thing. It used to be owned by Chevron and was operated back in up to the early 80s, I think. And so the legacy endowment of uranium in the United States, if you actually had to categorize it by state, New Mexico still has by and far and away the largest endowment. So New Mexico needs to get into the game for the sake of America, for the sake, if Americans want some degree of energy security themselves with domestic production, they have to get New Mexico going faster.
I agree with you. I was talking to someone the other day, I won't say who, but there's a privately owned uranium deposit. I think it's possibly the largest in the US, as described to me by this individual. Which has some, let's say, DoD connection. So in terms of deposit, that's so New Mexico is really, really, really important. But again, so coming back specifically to, so in terms of the New Mexico Environmental Department, that permit is around restoration. In terms of issues around, give us ISR, around water, that's all resolved, and that's already taken care of.
Well, I mean, yes, we have water. We have water rights. I mean, I don't know where I was going with this, but in terms of the worrying about the water itself, obviously when you get an aquifer exemption permit, part of the reason they give it to you is that you can't use the aquifer for anything else anyway, including agriculture. So no, I don't think anyone tries to get an aquifer exemption permit from a thing that would start as a possible body of fresh water that we needed access to. So a lot of it is just grinding through the process. And we'll get there. I mean, there's always opposition to anything anybody tries to do in the United States with mining. Of course, there's going to be opposition by some various groups and everything else. I mean, it's interesting now because the NGOs are obviously under a lot of scrutiny now with the things that are going on in Washington, and how much of a force they're going to be going forward, who knows? But the whole NGO movement was created originally was an anti-uranium movement back in the 70s, 80s. When people didn't want nuclear, and especially what happened post 3 Mile Island. So it was kind of like the world turning upside down when Microsoft went in to restart 3 Mile Island. Because I don't think people realized that, the people that were opposed to it didn't realize, wow, they produced power at 3 Mile Island. Yeah, I mean The other unit that wasn't damaged went on and produced power for decades. It's still there, and it's the easiest thing to turn back on in America, which is happening. So where I was going with New Mexico, though, is there's a bigger opportunity there. So as far as the importance of New Mexico to the energy file in America, if you will, and the nuclear file, it's important. But I would say for us directly, because we're the only person that's this far along in the permitting and that has a license to build a plant, we would presumably be the beneficiary of other good things that are happening. We have a 3 million pound capacity. There is, right at the place where we're building the plant, because this is the way the permit that we acquired was designed, it has to be built at Crown Point. There is a small resource at Crown Point we don't talk much about. It's because our share is 5 million, but it ties on to Encore's 15 million pounds. It's in the license. So there's 20 million pounds on top of the 50. Now there's a bigger opportunity in New Mexico with all the untested roll fronts and everything else that happened, because ISR was kind of a late stage thing. And most of this stuff in America that was found, it all stopped in 1980. And actually not because of 3 Mile Island, it's because nuclear was too successful and solved the energy crisis, and they had way too much electricity. And so a lot of what you see, and you see this with all the companies probably that you follow, there hasn't really been a new discovery per se in America since the 70s. So there's a big opportunity to actually make the resource in New Mexico a lot bigger over time.
Yeah, I think the US does need to get back on this, get back to where they were. I think it's a rather rudely described to me as 2 men in a wheelbarrow type stuff, mostly in the US. But New Mexico is important for the reason I said earlier. But and then you've got the ability to build your own plant, but no one wants to spend more money than they need to initially, because people kind of look to that kind of capex number and get slightly fearfully. Are there existing infrastructure plays there, legacy, which can be rebooted, as it were, or do you need to go it alone, and then that will first mover advantage will give you a say competitive edge with other people who may want to produce and process through your plant?
Oh, I think you could take resin to other places at a cost, and other places in America presumably that had capacity. Peninsula, that's what Peninsula thought they were doing. So
yeah,
I mean, you see the risk profile of that.
Yeah.
It's probably not something that if you could avoid that, and a plant's not expensive, that you might just say, hey, let's spend the 30 million bucks and build a plant. But yes, it's possible. In fact, everybody talks about all these amazing mills and plants and everything that has nothing going through it. Let's start putting some stuff through these plants that have capacity first. And obviously Cameco has a big thing that's not in production right now, and obviously they have a legacy resource there and a bunch of legacy plants, and you have to think at some point or another that part of the unproduced resource starts coming online again. But it's small beer, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I think the biggest that Cameco ever got as a producer in America was maybe 2 million. I'm thinking like maybe 2 million pounds a year. So, I mean, that's the thing when you start talking about if everything in America could go, including this one very large thing owned by a private company eventually. My feeling has always been, could you get back to 15 or 20 million pounds the way New Mexico was in the 70s, or America was in the 70s, mostly from New Mexico? Yeah, that's possible. Are you going to ever get all of your nuclear requirements that you need for the existing installed nuclear fleet from American domestic production? Unlikely, in my view, because of the geology.
Yeah. Okay, well, I mean, obviously, things advancing. And what's the timing on the permit? Do you have a sense of that? Is there an end date?
Well, I think I talked earlier that we hope that it would be a kind of a 26 event. We think the stuff that we control, which is getting the data set and getting the permit filed and underway and everything, is a thing that will be hopefully wrapped this year. And then you're in the process itself, and how quickly that goes is anybody's guess. But, when it's one permit, and it shouldn't, we don't think it's going to be a long, complicated thing. We're trying to get something happening in parallel with the agencies. And as I said, because of the other things we're doing in New Mexico, we obviously have dialogue going with the various agencies that matter in New Mexico. The New Mexico Environmental Department, New Mexico Mines Department. Our permit with Lahara is because it's on federal land. It's the Forest Service that governs that federally. And so that there is a process there that's already started. And again, it's permitting. It takes however long it takes, but we'll come out the other side of that with a permit, we believe. We'll probably be the first ones in New Mexico on the hard
Right.
rock side. Yeah.
And where would that put you in terms of obviously what you know today, and how many pounds you think you've got today, and what you may be able to do in the future? Where would this put you in terms of a US producer profile?
Oh, well, I mean, with the resource base we have, we would be the biggest U.S. producer. I mean, and we don't need to acquire anything. We just need to get permits. I mean, the Hard Rock, New Mexico thing logically would go to Blanding, but I mean, we'll see what happens there. I mean, that's 1 million pounds a year potentially. I mean, that's an ex-Homestake asset, And for those of your audience that don't know Homestake, I mean, that was a big, important American gold producer, legacy producer, but they were a huge uranium player, and were one of the bigger producers through that old boom in the '70s and everything else. They got bought by Barrick, and we bought the assets from Barrick.
Okay, well let's move on, because I think time is flying here, and I mean, there's lots going to catch up on, and lot to talk about. But we will hear more from you hopefully soon. With regards to what's going on in New Mexico, etc. But Kazakhstan, I'm going to park up Westmoreland if I may. We've kind of touched upon it in this call with regards to Aussie elections going on, state and federally. I think federally middle of the year, and let's see what that does for us. Should be positive. Labor look like they're on the way out if the polls are to be believed. But let's get about Kazakhstan. I'm super excited about Kazakhstan. Okay, it's an abundant country for oil, gas, and minerals, copper, gold, and obviously clearly uranium. Everyone knows Kazakhstan prom. You obviously picked that land package up in the last year after a fair bit of work. First of all, let's get first things. How do you pronounce the name of the project? Chusarisu?
Shusarisu.
Oh, not bad. Not bad. Okay. I'll give myself a solid 6
That's pretty good. Shusarisu Basin.
Okay. So give myself a solid 6 out of 10 for pronunciation. Well done. Okay. So tell folk at the load who new to this a little bit about it. What have you picked up, and what do you know?
I think you were one of the first people who knew about it, because I think we did a one of these podcasts right after the acquisition. I think it was during WNA as well. So yeah, I mean, I think we were a bit surprised by the reaction, because we were expecting people to have obviously a reaction, because I don't think anybody had gone in there as a Western or a foreign company and done anything on the uranium front. Partly because I think the questions we got were, I can't believe you're even allowed to do that sort of thing. And then you sort of had to explain why, and what Kazatomprom all about, and how they operate, and how they have all these different partners and everything else. And so I think people mentally got their head around why that would be smart for them to incentivize foreign direct investment to go find some resources on the cheap, and then obviously they get to play anyway. So as far as rebuilding their asset base, it made sense. And so we did it through some folks who were in country and they knew what they were doing in terms of the whole license process, which was a bit, it's a bit tricky. You go into a foreign country and do that. But yeah, we were able to get some really good ground that ties on to the existing production centers that Shusarisu Basin, 60% of Kazakhstan, which is the number one producer in the world, and it's ISR, and it's all roll fronts, and all their mines typically are in this grade range that's sort of, I want to say 600 to 800 ppm ISR, at different depths. But there was work done outside those core areas, and we're now getting ourselves, as part of the process where we go to exploration, we're obviously getting access to some of that data. And, there's known roll fronts that we're going to have on our ground, and we are excited about it. We've already got a bunch of walk-up type drill targets that we'll prioritize. And with finding ISR, it's all about drilling. It's really wide space drilling that narrows down to tighter drilling, where you're trying to find where the roll front is, where the nose of the roll front is, where the stuff drops out of solution, where there's a carbon reductant and all that sort of thing. And so, yeah, no, it's exciting because it's big. I mean, it's, you're not looking for something small there. You're looking for, I tell people, like, we're looking for a church rock, 50 million pound type minimum thing. And if you look at Kazakhstan's 19 JVs or whatever else, I think their smallest mine is, they talk in tons. They don't talk in pounds. It's 2,000 to 4,000 tons is probably their smallest mine that they have an interest in. And they take a little piece of everything no matter what. And the smaller ones, they take less. And that's just how that's evolved. And then typically they have partners that are people that need the uranium for their nuclear energy programs. I mean, that's makes sense. And so we're pretty hopeful that we'll be able to find, worst case, we'll find, something on the small end of what you find in Kazakhstan, which would be quite exciting. And it's, you short circuited a lot of the exploration because, it's walk up and it's drilling. Now, it's not going to be as cheap as drilling Westmoreland. I mean, Westmoreland, we drill holes that are 100 feet deep. We drilled 106 holes last year, and and we had a 10,000 meter program or something. So, 10,000 meters in drilling in Canada, you don't get a lot for that. I mean, some of these formations in Kazakhstan now are the ones that are being brought on, particularly the last one, big one that's known, which is the Spudinovskoye, which is the Russians. That's much deeper, and so they're bringing on the things that were harder, because if they were easier, they would have brought them on first.
Yeah, and I was seeing someone, VP of exploration of uranium play in the Athabasca Basin. They're saying they're up at around $1,000 at the moment, all in per meter, $1,000. That's kind of crazy to think.
Braveheart's deep pockets, right? That's
yeah.
Let's go.
Yeah. You can sort of see where the money goes very, very, very quickly. Look, so I think what you're saying is that perhaps people need to kind of moderate their expectations in terms of you're not going to necessarily aim to be the next Kazatomprom, nor though, and they should probably also moderate their view on, Kazatomprom as a place for a Western company to do business. Operationally, there's a lot of Western companies operating in the country. Sure, is that right?
Yes, I mean, part of what gave us encouragement was you had all the big copper company, major Western copper companies in there, Rio. I think Fortescue is in there, BHP, and as of this week, interestingly enough, Friedland's just gone in there with Ivanhoe, and so it's not very often you beat Friedland to an interesting place. We're not looking for copper, but that's a big housekeeping seal of approval to me, because he's a genius and he's prepared to go elephant hunting where the elephants are. And I'm pretty encouraged. So the other thing is people worry about, you don't have the final deal with the Kazatomprom and all this stuff. So, we haven't found anything yet. So, and it's an asymmetric upside opportunity, because the exploration commitment's only $3 million a year. And so you'd be crazy not to, if you had this kind of opportunity in front of you, said, you might get the beginnings of something for the first $3 million that you spend. I think most people, if they was pitched to them that way, would go, yeah, we probably ought to do that. And we've got so much ground as well. One of the things we talked about was actually just putting in a spin-off company. We may still do that. We'll see how that goes, because we frankly got so much ground there that it would be hard even for a major to attack the exploration potential of it all in any kind of reasonable time frame, and we're kind of under a bit of a clock there. So we'll see what happens with that. We like having other companies in there exploring with us. It's good. It's good I think it's good for the space. I think it's good for the branding, that obviously there's going to be further material found in Kazakhstan. But they sort of need to, because they're kind of an unusual company in that they've told you that they got a reserve depletion problem, which most companies, you never see, charts that don't do anything but go from the lower left to the upper right. I mean, they've put out a chart that goes from the upper left to the lower right and said, this is our reserve profile. And so, and then we're back into the whole macro. Why are you bullish on the macro? Well, that's the number one producer in the world. I'm surprised the utilities aren't in freakout mode.
Ditto. I'm surprised as well. Okay, but sticking with Kazakhstan, like it sounds like, from a tax royalty structure and government intervention, there's a kind of proper mining rule of law there understood by Western companies, or they wouldn't be coming in. So everyone's sort of comfortable about that one. So in terms of the way that you play that, you said, okay, potential maybe some JV partners, or bring others, or maybe a spin out, etc. To kind of give this thing a bit more money and kind of room to breathe. If you are looking at that, when do you sort of make those decisions? Is that a this year thing, or is it a market will tell us thing?
Yeah, we have an underlying deal that is the underlying deal. So you would have to do a different deal, which is either do a spin out, which was contemplated, or look at doing something else in terms of being willing to do other arrangements with other parties on some of the land package. Because right now we've tied up like these 22 licenses or whatever it is, and they have certain commitments attached to them and what have you. So you'd have to maybe do something else there. The logical sequence of how you approach, I think, for small companies especially, I think when you start having some success, you start wanting to pretty quickly get into, well, what do the economic arrangements look like? How is this ultimately going to go if it develops into a producible asset? We haven't worried about that yet because we haven't found anything yet. And I do think you've got to take a little comfort from the fact that, I mean, if there were no other important uranium and nuclear partners in there doing deals, having JVs, taking their offtake, and that includes, France, Korea, Canada, Russia, China. There's a model there, which is we're going to produce this stuff. We're going to keep our share in Kazatomprom, which, by the way, Kazatomprom went to the whole thing before they opened up the mining code to say, please come in for foreign direct investment. They took Kazatomprom public. So it isn't like a state-owned company, in some petrostate where, yeah, please give us a JV and we hope that maybe we'll be able to make some money out of it later. I mean, there is a lot of visibility already in Kazatomprom, and they're systemically important to the industry. So we take a bunch of comfort from that. Can we tell you exactly how this is going to play out and answer all of your questions about what might happen when we find this theoretical 50 million pound deposit in our first 2 years of work? No, I can't tell you that, but we'll get to that. And, do I think we'll get back more than the $3 million or $10 million, whatever that it costs? Yeah, in spades.
Right. Okay. Interesting. I've got so many more questions here around sort of market timing and uranium cycles, etc., and financing and etc., and obviously risk mitigation and all this. But let's maybe kind of wrap it up here because I want to give people the chance to digest what we've talked about today. If we're having a blunt conversation with the investors, we're saying, look, the market's on this, got this pregnant pause thing going on at the moment. It is trying to work out, the relationship between spot and term. Equities are playing an entirely different game there. Do you think that we've had a good enough run in uranium and that's it? We need to kind of tap out now, or do you think there are more drivers other than the constants of demand conversations that are truly meaningful, are going to have an actual impact? And what do you think those things are? Because I'm kind of slightly sick of the 5 years worth of the next big thing. Because the next big thing was never the next big thing. It was a sort of accumulation of lots of small things. So is that going to change?
No, I think fair point, Matt. So I would say no. If you want to look at and again, look at a company like Boss as a successful example of, yeah, we actually went out and did it, and we didn't trip and smash our face on the pavement, and we're a real producer, and they got a lot of that valuation ahead of them being a real producer, but they actually delivered on the backside of it, and so there's going to be a live up and running uranium company with a bunch of margin in it. And, that's the kind of company that we're going to be. Where the opportunity is, I think, for us, I think you've always got I certainly think from a price standpoint, the price thing is going to come back in to drive the space somewhat. But, it could be 6 months of this grinding around and not a lot of excitement. Where the opportunity is, I think, for us is the things we've talked about, as people realize, Laramide's serious about actually getting in production. And they start knocking off a few of these milestones that are holding back the valuation of the projects on a PNAV basis, because our PNAV is a joke compared to some of the other developers, partly because people just want to see all the risk and not the opportunity, and they're not giving you credit for it until you do it. We had the Queensland election, and we had no credit for that. They're not going to give it until the Queensland premier stands up and says, yeah, I love uranium mining, bring it on. But you got to think there's a re-rate coming. So we have re-rate potential on that basis because the projects are actually, they're obviously things that are big and are going to happen, whether it's with us or whether it's some other company that ends up taking them on and building them. And so there's value there that is going to happen irrespective of a flat uranium price. So, which I think not a lot of companies necessarily have that. And there's more than one of them. And then you've got Kazakhstan, whether we start drilling holes and people start to get excited about that, we'll see. But I mean, we're pretty excited about that. We won't be drilling until September or so, but yeah, no, we're excited about. I mean, you're always excited about finding things, right? That's if you're in the mineral business and you don't like finding things, you probably should find another line of work.
Okay, and brilliant. So I just want to be clear on with Church Rock, we're talking about 50 million pounds. We're talking licensed up to 3 million pounds production per annum, right? Obviously, ISR takes, you've got to manage those well fields, and you'll ramp that up. But that'll be not just in pounds terms, but also potentially in production terms, the biggest producer in the US. That's what we're saying.
Well, if Church Rock got to 3 million and you had O'Hara comes online at 1 million, there's 4 million. I mean, yeah, I can't tell you who's the biggest now, but I don't think there's anybody doing 1 million.
There's not.
So, and Cameco, I believe, I think we talked about it earlier, I think was maybe 2 million. Can they come back at 2 million? I don't know from what the legacy asset base that remains there. I mean, I would guess that they're on the backside of the resource in the assets that they own in the United States. There's the one big private company that theoretically would be bigger. But I think they're looking at that as like a kind of a 3 to 5 year thing minimum in terms of getting through the process. And they would be very bullish if they were to come on, though, because I think New Mexico will rock if that happens. It's a good sign. If that's happening, then New Mexico's happening, and there'll be more activity there. I mean, there'll be more new drilling. You don't see much new drilling in the United States, really. I think it's all around existing things that need just to replace the ISR well fields that they're mining.
Well, I'm not surprised. I mean, it's not just a kind of uranium environment for the last 10 years. It's also, I think, the last few years, say the Biden years, it's been not necessarily encouraged, and it's been expensive to do. We've seen a lot of Canadians leave the US, go back to Canada for mining. So lots of reasons, but hopefully lots of hope about New Mexico there. Like I say, sorry, Mark, I'm going to keep you back. Thank you very much for today. Love the update. Kind of reminder to myself of the scale of the opportunity in front of us, and sitting at maybe 150 million market cap. Perhaps there's a long ways to go.
Yeah,
we'll see
and less in US dollars because of our northern peso at the moment. The dollar's very, very strong. Yeah.
We're not going to get into politics. We promised ourselves no politics. Right, have a good one. I'll see you soon, potentially up in PDAC in Toronto.
Yeah, always a pleasure. Look forward to seeing you there. Yeah.